I've been teaching for about 6 years, lecturing in photography. The team from Ningbo, Zhejiang Fashion Institute of Technology, came over and were looking to start a fashion communication course over there. I came out last year, so I'm just lecturing fashion photography and fashion film. Actually, the course is really growing. It's really getting quite, because it has such a directional look and it's so different than anything else. It's really getting some notice in Beijing and in China generally. The reason we knew it was needed in China was just because the industry is very different there. It's very money-led and industry-led, but there is an actual industry and there is actually money for creative industries. So the communication course was actually asked by the industry last year if they would try to write a fashion film course with somebody, because there was nobody to actually do the fashion films at the time. Nick set 3 briefs. Well, he helped me set 3 briefs for the students. So one was from him, which was based on fashion in motion, which is about the clothing. Try not to think too much about concepts or anything too in-depth with narrative. The second brief was from Nadal, which was about a portrait and getting as close to somebody as possible, or even doing a self-portrait. And the third one was Gareth Pugh, which was a really challenging one actually, because it was 15 seconds and it was all based on an awakening, the beginnings of something, but trying to get that across in 15 seconds in a fashion film. So that came about because I got in touch with SHOWstudio and just told them about my students and how creative they are, but also how cut off they are from fashion film in general. The students, when we actually set the brief, it was quite interesting because just the censorship on the internet, the way that it's censored, it's not everything is censored, so you can find you can find Berlin Fashion Film Festival and you can find films from Nowness. So the students would show me things sometimes that I hadn't seen. But SHOWstudio, I think because there's nudity on it, was definitely, we had to look at it through a VPN. So I think it's, much as they did get to look at that, what I found in a positive way was that I think it made them think more about their own experiences, where they come from as young artists, and maybe more about their family circumstances, memories. So I think partly the reason I actually got in touch with Nick now was just because the work just seemed so fresh. And I think it's strangely, I feel like I'm complimenting censorship and I really don't believe in that at all. But I think maybe the amount of distractions we have, the amount of creative work we can look at, sometimes creates this fear of doing anything worthwhile, or creates a feeling that you can't help but copy. I think within teaching as well, you can definitely feel the influence of the party, not always in a negative way, but just when you're actually setting a brief or telling the students about anything, it's going through an interpreter. So it feels like your information is always filtered through one person. But when we think of an interpreter, we never think of it like what interpretation means. So it's their interpretation of what you're saying, and then that goes to the student and they interpret it, that I find really interesting. Sometimes it's negative, because if your interpreter maybe is more political or doesn't really understand what you're trying to tell people to do, it can really change the work they come out with. But then, I don't know, one thing that's really I've found quite important, and something that you can't change, is sort of the spirit of youth and youth culture, whether it's surrounded by censorship and limitations and politics you don't agree with. It still is there, and youth culture still exists, and young people will still find a way to be free. So with that, I think it does affect it, but it almost creates a much more, like an explosion of freedom. The first lot of work I saw by the students was so brave and daring, and quite, because they're not technical, they've not been trained in art before, they've also never seen fashion film before, maybe the lesson before they did their first fashion films. So they don't have the same limitations that maybe somebody going through college in the UK would have. They're not scared of the rules because they don't know there are any. So for me, that was really inspiring. So some of the students, especially the girls, there's a definite feminist, quite strong. Yeah, the girls come across quite strong and confident. Even the quieter ones, they're very confident in their own beliefs and where they're going, even if they don't really know where that is. They tend to not censor themselves as much. The boys seem more, to do that a little bit more. But I think sometimes the problem or the confusion or the things I'm discovering that confuse me would be that as a group, people are used to working in a group communal manner. It's not about the individual. The culture's never really been about that. And this is first generation where they are allowed to be individual. So I think there's always a tension between being an individual and having opinions that differ from each other, and the feeling that you grew up with that being not a good thing. I do feel like there's a lot of pushing the envelope and then pulling right back. But the ones who have confidence don't seem so affected by that. They don't seem as reserved about maybe nudity or sexuality or, talking about subjects like being gay or, being trans. Things that you would, I think from a Western viewpoint, if you'd never been to China, you would just assume that was banned. And it actually isn't. I hope really they can find themselves as artists, whether that's commercial or creative. Because obviously the industry is so different there, and be open to other influences, Western as well as Eastern, because that's something I'm trying to find out now is, who is inspiring students in China, where's the subculture in China, what's happening for them in their lives that will then inform their work and make it much stronger. So I think I just want to see a lot of really strong artists, whether it's conceptual art or fashion film or, fashion photography. I just want to see strong work. They either do very, very strong work or sort of work that needs they need a few more years to hone it. But it definitely is original, if nothing else.